Gig Gab, episode 442 for Monday, August 12th, National Vinyl Record Day, 2024. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians here in Durham, New Hampshire. I am Dave Hamilton, and my guest co-host today, is someone that we have talked about on this show more than a few times, and I am super happy to have Kirk Hamilton, no relation as far as we know, from Strong Songs on the show today. Thank you, Kirk, so much for coming on.
Sure thing, Dave. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and I haven't done a whole lot of research, but I don't think we're related despite the common last name. So
no, I guess you never really know with Hamiltons, but there are a fair number of us here.
That's
so
right.
It's a safe bet that if we are related, it's very distantly.
It's very it goes way back up the chain. That's right. Yeah. So I have told our listeners about your show. It was one of our listeners that told me about your show. They know I'm a Fish fan, and they told me about your episode where you dissected limb by limb on Strong Songs. And I actually want to ask a little bit about that later, because I think you're a crazy person and I like it for what you do. But I want to talk a little bit about your history here. You're a saxophone player, you studied jazz performance, and you were also a podcaster, and sort of all of these things led to the genesis of Strong Songs. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. I mean, how does anyone become a podcaster, right? I was talking to my wife about this yesterday, that nobody in their 40s who's a professional podcaster planned to become a podcaster, because that wasn't really a thing.
Also true of people in our 50s. That's right.
Yes. I guess nobody in their 40s or older, right? Because when I was making my career plans, I was, podcasting wasn't really a thing. I was, a little saxophonist who didn't really know what he wanted to do and just knew that he liked playing jazz. So I'm a saxophonist first and foremost. That's what I went to school for. I studied at the University of Miami, a very serious business jazz program. And it was a very intense experience. I got really good at saxophone and at sort of arranging and all the other sort of auxiliary jazz skills, and graduated, moved to San Francisco. And then I just sort of gigged and taught around San Francisco for about 10 years. And at the same time started learning guitar, because even when I was in school, I really wanted to write songs and have a rock band, like have a band. And playing sax in the band was cool. Obviously, like at that time, in the 90s when I was growing up, Dave Matthews Band was really big. I liked Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. There were bands that were kind of either jazz fusion or like pop with some jazz elements that had saxophone players. But you still had to kind of be the sax guy who sort of stood off to the side. And I've always been a writer. Like, I really like writing. I really like songwriting. And I just knew that I was really drawn to the idea of writing songs. And I just couldn't be a singing saxophone player. I know they're out there. I've seen guys do it. But it's just not... I don't know. There's something about it that's always turned me off.
And have you always been a singer too, or at least had some interest in singing?
Yeah, I've always been interested in singing. I've never been a very strong singer. It's always been a weakness of mine. I've worked on it a lot. I've taken lessons. I'm much better now than I used to be. I'm more aware of my limitations and sort of what my voice can do and what it can't do. Which is, I guess, the most you could ask for voice instruction to give you. Yes. Learning proper technique so that you don't shred yourself.
And,
that too,
And then also learning your limitations. And probably, although your schooling would have taught you how to sing in tune, or at least how to hear when you're singing out of tune.
Yeah,
those sorts
that
of
is true, actually. I think that to some extent, like all my training on other instruments makes it harder to learn to sing, just because singing is so very different. This maybe is that's a tangent.
No, I like this. Let's go. Let's tug on this thread. Let's go.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, so the thing with singing, right, is that you have to build your own instrument. Like some vocal teacher I had, I can't remember who this was. I think this is an old saw in voice teaching, is that learning to sing is like you walk into your violin lesson on the first day, and your violin teacher just gives you some wood and some gut string and says, okay, so first thing, you're going to build a violin. And then you spend the next year building a violin by hand before you can even begin to play. Because when you're singing, you have this weird process of conceptualizing and building up your instrument where you can't just go rent a voice from the woodwind shop like you can with a saxophone, and then you just have a saxophone that works, and then you start to learn to play it like very quickly. With the voice, it's so weird. You have all these ingrained bad habits. The instrument isn't visible because it's inside of your throat.
Yeah.
And then, so learning it and mastering it just requires a completely different philosophy and a different approach than learning guitar or piano or saxophone or drums or whatever.
That's and so really, I never thought about that before, but you're right, because starting to play any instrument, at the very beginning, I suppose it can be argued that it doesn't matter what the quality of the instrument is. Like there's
a floor. Like it needs to not leak, right? It needs to be fundamentally functional.
Fundamentally functional, but even that, the difference, if it at the 6-month mark of playing an instrument, or even the 3-month mark, if you're steadily working at this, the difference between it fundamentally works and it actually, like on a guitar, the action isn't 4 inches above the neck. Like those sorts of things make a huge difference in your ability to play, right? And you don't know that when you start because you have no frame of reference. With your voice, you can't start with a perfectly built instrument no matter how much money you have. Like it's like you could start with a perfect guitar if you're willing to throw all the money at it before you ever, take a lesson. But with your voice, no, you are building it up as you go and maintaining it too as you go. You don't ever get to replace it. Well, at least not. Hopefully not. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You can't get a cybernetic voice yet. I guess you can get a voice box, but that's not really the same thing.
It's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely people who have a more, everyone's vocal folds are different. There are people who are born with like really flexible and really rangy voices. And some of the great singers do have, like Mariah Carey has vocal folds that can do things that most people's can't. But yeah, correct. I mean, for the most part, you're learning how to use it. And for me, I really started getting serious about learning to sing when I was like in my 30s. So I had already really learned a lot of instruments, and especially really learned saxophone, which is a wind instrument and is in some ways like singing. It's just that you take the whole voice box apparatus, like the whole sort of larynx and everything, and you put it outside of your body. So your wind column is there, but then the reed is kind of your vocal folds.
Yeah, right.
And the saxophone forms a second resonant body. So like you kind of resonate in yourself, but then the saxophone is like a second body. So it's very weird. It's like you're taking your vocal apparatus and putting it outside of your body. So everything works in the wrong order. Like your embouchure in your mouth, like the wind moves through your mouth before it hits the voice box. What would be the vocal cords, right? Which is like backwards for singing, where like your mouth and your sort of head are the
last
saxophone.
Part. Yeah.
Right. So it's just like a very weird thing to have to unlearn and then realize that that's not there anymore. And even while I'm a tenor, I have a very similar range to my tenor saxophone. Like the way that I create those notes is completely different. So I've had to unlearn a lot of things and also just have different expectations for what breakthroughs are going to feel like and what mastery is going to feel like, because they're almost so similar that it makes it harder for me to disaggregate them, the saxophone and the voice. In my head.
No, it as someone who, I certainly am a drummer first, or at least that's how I introduce myself. I've been playing piano longer than any other instrument. Right. I play guitar badly. I play a guitar well enough to accompany myself and like be functional on the instrument, and that's it. And I sing too, although usually not when my throat's like it is today. But like I've never learned a wind instrument. I don't even know that I've ever even attempted to play a saxophone. So like all of that is foreign to me. That's really interesting. Yeah.
It's definitely a challenge. But so to talk through the rest of the story to get me to strong songs. No, I feel like all of these little tangents.
No, I love the tangents.
It's like, and it's how it felt living it, right? Like it was a series of tangents that led me from the late 90s to now.
Steve Jobs says that your path is you can only connect the dots looking backwards. You never follow the path until you followed it, and then you can say, here was the path. But
yes. So I find that's very true. I keep that in mind anytime I'm giving someone career advice. I'm like, look, it's not going to work for you the way it did for me. It was a very circuitous path for me from there to here. So I wanted to learn how to play guitar. I'd already kind of learned a little bit, But then I, got a little more into it when I was out in San Francisco, sort of, got some recording software for the first time, started learning how to record stuff in my apartment. Was pretty bad at guitar, but, had got to the point where I could play a few things and never really took any lessons, which I regret now that I am finally taking guitar lessons every week and really practicing. Like, I think I would have advanced a lot faster, but I had a weird mentality at the time that I think is common for music students. Well, I can imagine that it's common anyways, where I graduated and had done so much study and had gotten, on saxophone, like I'd gotten really good at saxophone. Like there are lots and lots of people who are better than me, but like I can like play anything on saxophone.
You can hold your own. Yeah.
Yeah. And I could do it for a living. And I kind of felt done with school. I was like, well, okay, like I learned all the stuff. Now I'm going to go be a player and I'm going to go teach. And instead of thinking like I should take piano lessons for 10 years now, and then I want to learn guitar, I should take guitar lessons for 10 years. I should like really take the instrument as seriously as I took the saxophone. Because if I'd done that by now, I would be like really good at all these
You'd be really good at a lot of things.
Right.
I want to talk about this. I want you to tell your story here, but I think you are really good at a lot of instruments here, and I want to dig into that. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
at least from listening to Strong Songs, but we'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that now I've finally had the time and the maturity, I think, to take that approach over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's starting to pay dividends. Though I still have a whole plan for drums and piano to kind of return to those two instruments and get better at them. And I guess bass too. The bass is kind of a lot like guitar, at least for as good as I need to be at it. Anyhow, so yeah, started learning guitar, learning to write songs, put a band together, really it was my friends, but got a group of guys together who were all better at better guitar player than me, better backup singer than I am, a lead singer, way better drummer, bass player. I didn't even play drums at the time, really. And so, got a band together. That was pretty cool. Learned how to have a band, played shows around San Francisco. We were never very big.
Were you playing saxophone in this band, or were you playing guitar?
No. I was playing guitar and I was the lead singer and songwriter. So it was my sort of limited voice with then my friend Dan is a fantastic singer and he was like the harmony guy who could do anything. Yep. And honestly really like should have been our lead singer, but I wrote the songs and I was doing the thing where the lead singer is the less strong singer, which is actually kind of a somewhat common thing in rock bands.
I was going to say that, I could pick REM off the top of my head. Objectively, Mike Mills is a better singer than Michael Stipe. Right. Michael Stipe is a better frontman than Mike Mills, right? And so, that band obviously worked perfectly, so we'll leave it alone. But, that's a common thing, and I think having harmony singers who understand A, can sing in tune, and B, know how to blend, and B, know how to hear all of those things.
The blend is really key.
It's key. Yeah. It's what makes it work. Yeah.
And kind of he was always a fun secret weapon. Like I could give him leads that I could never come close to. And suddenly it's like, oh, wow, that guy can really sing. And I think that was exciting for people at our shows.
Yep.
I did that for a little while. We were together for a few years and that was really fun. After that band, I started releasing stuff of my own that was pretty different. We were kind of like, it was the mid-2000s. We were a sort of new wave, Telecasters and disco beats sort of.
What was the name of the band?
We were called Square Tape. Originally, we were called Tape, but then there's a lot of bands called Tape, and then I was like, well, I guess we need a more complicated name that no one else has, so we changed it. I think Tape is a way better name for a band.
I like Tape, yeah.
Yeah, that's how it goes. We probably shouldn't have changed our name. It's not like we ever got big enough for it to matter. But,
sure. Yeah.
So anyways, we did a little bit of recording. I learned a bit about that style of music, which was just very different from like jazz saxophone and that whole world that I was in. And I was still gigging and still teaching. I started teaching at a high school in San Francisco. I was directing a jazz band there. It was a private school, so I didn't need an education degree, which was actually really nice because I was like a performance degree, totally just played jazz and didn't have time to go through the whole rigmarole of getting a master's and getting certified, which is a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Yeah, but the education world keeps they protect their own business model. So
and I get it, but it was tough for me. Or at the time, I was very critical of that since I felt like I liked to teach and I had a lot to say or to offer as a teacher. But I knew a lot of professional musicians and professional artists who just didn't have the bandwidth to go the full education route. This was a good middle ground, though. Obviously, it'd be nice if not just really expensive private schools could offer this kind of instruction. So I started there as I was an assistant to the current director there. And then he kind of hired me on, and we built up the program until we had 2 big bands. And I got to teach a high school jazz band for a few years. So that was really fun.
Awesome. It must have been a blast. Yeah.
It was. The school is called the Urban School of San Francisco. It's this fantastic school, like a very like expensive private school that I had never really seen that world before. And I was pretty blown away by it, just like that a school could even be like that. I went to public school in Indiana. Like I had no frame of reference for like what it was like to go to a school that is like that much money and like tiny class size. Anyways, it was a cool experience. I really, really liked teaching a lot. I like wrote for my band. I got really into it. I invested a lot of myself in it. And then around 2009, 2010, I sort of discovered the world of video game writing, and specifically like video game blogging. And I'd always liked games. Like I think they're really interesting. I have a million takes on video games and music, all the similarities between the two art forms. Don't even get me started. But I just sort of discovered this world of people who were blogging about video games and writing about them, not in a kind of commercial magazine-y way, but in a kind of academic, critical way that I just found really interesting. And it had nothing to do with anything I was doing musically, but I just thought it was really cool. And I had been kind of getting into blogging and wanting to find an angle for just writing more on the internet, since, like I said, I've always been a writer. I always liked writing. So I started a video game blog just for fun, and it really quickly blew up into me getting hired at the time, Gawker Media's video game website, Kotaku.
Okay.
I got hired there as a deputy editor, and then spent 7 or 8 years writing there as like a full-time job in this like really high-profile like video game criticism job, where I suddenly was writing reviews for millions of people, and kind of took over my life for a while, both because it was a really intense job. Like at the time, especially, that was like peak web media.
Yeah. That was like good time to run a website. Yeah. As someone who ran a website in those days, that's when we made our money. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, man. It was pre pivot to video, pre any of that.
Yes.
Pre Gamergate, pre dissolution of Gawker
Chat
Media.
GPT. That has changed a lot of things. Oh yeah.
I bet.
Yep.
I'll bet. It's funny because I've been out of that game since the rise of AI, but I can only imagine. I mean, I
have too, and I'm glad. Yeah. Like I've heard from search traffic, which I'm sure when you were writing for Kotaku was a major driver of search referrals was a major driver of traffic, and as it was for us at Mac Observer, and I think it still is for the folks who are running Mac Observer. But I have a friend who works and writes for another tech publication, and between October of last year and January, they saw 85% of their traffic drop because
that's terrifying.
Well, they mainly write how-to articles,
right?
And people started using ChatGPT and other LLMs because you can get a much more bespoke how-to out of ChatGPT than you can. Searching the web and finding, this is how to do something similar, so I'll adapt it myself. It's like, no, ChatGPT will do it for you.
Well, and all the way that, because in games there's a lot of tutorial writing, and for a long time, actually, at Kotaku, it was like at the advent of, like, the realization that writing a tips post for a game, like a new game, was a great way to get what we would call I'm sure you know this term, evergreen traffic, where it's like writing a post that's just people are going to come back to again and again and again. Like I think I wrote a tips for Skyrim, that game for Skyrim, when that game came out. It was right after I'd started, and we knew it was going to be big, but we didn't know that it was going to stay big it's like still big. Like it was going to stay big for 10 years. And I was getting traffic off of it forever because every time someone Googled tips for Skyrim, it came up. And now, and because of like SEO incentives, like if you Google the tips for like Elden Ring or whatever, there's so much garbage in the search result. Like it's so many of these weird sites. I won't name any of them. I can't even remember the names. They're always like, you click it and it's like an incomplete wiki entry that says, soon we'll have how to find this item. And I'm like, no, I just want someone to tell me where it is. Like,
where is it now?
This item I need. So anyways, I can understand why people would go to an LLM if it can just tell them rather than searching.
It's a better user experience,
right?
Aside
but
from
at what cost?
All the problems, right? Yes, exactly. It's short-term gain for sure. Yeah.
Well, and for us at the time, it was also Facebook. Like I was at Gawker Media through the whole Facebook video fiasco, where we like hired people. I think we had people on staff that were just making Facebook video. Like we hired a video team, which Kotaku was a blog. Like, it was a very good blog when it was at its best. It was like a bunch of people writing short and longer, like funny, interesting takes about video games. And then we just had to start adding video, and it just increased. It was just this weird fit that didn't work. And I know this happened across the media ecosystem. Like, everyone was adding video. And then we had like full-time Facebook video people because Facebook, I think, was paying Gawker Media, just like they were paying everybody directly to make video for Facebook. And then the bottom fell out of that whole thing, and it was just a huge disaster.
Sure did. Yep.
Man, it's funny because like I know about this stuff and paid attention to it, but it didn't have very much bearing on my day-to-day. Honestly, like most of what I did was play video games and write reviews of them. Like that was what I was really interested in, and that was a really fun job. I mostly really enjoyed it for all the stresses and the difficulties of like writing a high-profile, blog and being on social media at that time. And then in the video game world, especially post Gamergate, I got more and more alienated from the community, and I just wanted to be less and less a part of it. So there was this point at which I realized, like, okay, this has been fun. I like writing about video games, but they're not like my reason for living. My reason for living is music. Like, music is the thing for me. It always will be, and it always has been. So it's time.
This has all been wonderful, but now I'm on my way.
Yes, exactly.
Is essentially what it is.
Yeah. To quote the poet. Exactly.
But it allowed you to build up a following on social media, and then pivot that into your first podcast, right? Which was a gaming focused podcast, and is that still going? Triple Click?
In a form, yes.
Okay.
Well, Triple Click is now what it's called. So it was called Kotaku Split Screen when we started it. And that was like my foray into podcasting. So yeah, as much as video games and Kotaku and that whole writing gig, it was kind of a weird like side tangent in my musical career path. There were totally things about it that like synergized really well or whatever with music and with my just general career, because like you said, I did build up a following. I like wrote a lot of things that I think people liked. And, I was at the time I was pretty active on social media, and it's like on Twitter, I had a lot of followers. Like I definitely like, people knew who I was. And my colleague, Jason Schreier, and I launched Kotaku Split Screen just totally on our own initiative. He just was always saying to me, dude, we should just make a podcast. It'd be easy. We could just do it. Like we could host it ourselves. It was hardly an official podcast when we launched it, even though it was under the auspices of Kotaku.
You branded it there. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but we just made it because we had a lot of freedom to do that kind of thing. There was no podcast division at Gawker Media.
Of course, not at that point in time anyway.
Not at that point.
Right. And and being a musician and having a studio, you understood both sides, the techie side and the tech of both sides of it, I should say.
Yeah, which was a huge advantage. Like that, I could just say, I can make this thing completely right. I can make this thing completely by myself. Yep. And even at the time, like it was kind of fun to write at Kotaku because I would allow little glimpses of my musical self into that job in a way that I think was enjoyable only because, like, I really play music. Like there are a lot of people in a lot of different fields who are like, oh, I play a little guitar or whatever. But like, I would be like, check it out, like, and play saxophone. And it was like, I'd be playing like whatever, advanced jazz stuff. Like, because I like went to school for it. It was like
this is a thing you can do. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So being able to write like the Kotaku Split Screen theme song is this like ripping saxophone thing with this killer solo, and like being able to kind of add those elements into what I was doing there. It was always just sort of a fun thing. I don't think a lot of people noticed, but it was just enough that I think there were a few people out there who were aware that I was like a music guy as well.
Sure.
And so then as we made Split Screen, I started doing a like Kirk's music pick at the end of every episode. It would just be like, here's a cool album you should listen to, because I just had infinity recommendations I could make, especially to like most people listening to a gaming podcast who just, I like know a lot of classic jazz records and stuff, or even modern jazz records, like things that people would think were cool.
Yeah.
So I was recommending a lot of music, and then I found those segments getting longer and longer until I think at first it was at the beginning of the episode, and then we decided we need to put this later because it's taking too long. Like the episode starts and then you just talk about some metric song for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And people want to hear the video game news. Like they don't actually.
Yeah, they signed up for the second part, not the first part.
Right.
Yeah.
They're happy for the little bonus at the end. So I started putting it at the end. It started getting longer. I found myself going back and like adding notes after we recorded, being like, okay, listen for the guitar part here. This part's really cool. And then fading in. So
this is where
out.
Strong Songs sort of began. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So I just was, as I did that, I was like, this is cool. Like this format of just sort of talking over music and slowing it down and going back and highlighting things for people, this is a really great way to explain music, like to share music with people and to teach them about it. So I had that kind of incubating. This was toward the end of my run there. Jason, my co-host, was like, you should do a whole episode about Toto's Africa, because I want to know. It was at the time, this was like 2017 or so, when we first started talking about it. And that song was having a resurgence. I think Gia Tolentino, who is a great writer who actually worked at Jezebel at Gawker, wrote this incredible piece. Maybe we can link it in show notes or something. I'll send it to you. I think it was for the New Yorker, and it's something like the experience of listening to Toto's Africa in an abandoned mall.
Yes.
And it's about that whole, there was a YouTube channel that would just simulate the sound of like songs playing over the PA in an abandoned mall. I don't even think it was real. I think they were using like sound design tools, but it would be like a picture, like the image on the video would be this evocative picture of an empty mall. And then you would just hear like, bum, 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 ba, dun, 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 like kind of, but like over the PA and that kind of, certain
echoey and sort of lost. Yeah.
And then she writes this beautiful piece that's about the sort of how emotional and evocative the experience of hearing that is. Which
the overwhelming emotion of hearing Toto's Africa remixed to sound like it's playing in an empty mall is the name of the piece, and we will link to it. Absolutely.
A great piece. Gia is an amazing writer, and reading that, and I don't know, I think that went kind of viral, and people were talking about the song a lot. So Jason's like, you should talk about why that song is good, because I think I think
Mike Massey also had helped spur on that Africa moment. He was do you know who Mike Massey is? He was a defense attorney, I think, or a prosecutor from Denver. I can't remember which side of one
or the other.
He's on that side of the bar. Doesn't matter.
Sure.
And he and a buddy would play like acoustic at this pizza joint, on Friday night or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they started recording it, and they would multi-track record it, a video, and then they'd multi-track the audio so he could go back and like mix it and make it sound a little tighter than not sound like it's in a pizza joint. Although occasionally you'd hear like number 42, or whatever.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And he's got a great voice, and they did this cover of Africa, and he mixed it and he put it out on YouTube, and it instantly got like millions of views. Yeah, it's a great cover. I mean, he's just got a spectacular voice, so much so that he has parlayed that into a career. He no longer, he may keep his law license, but he does not practice, to my knowledge. So
I love to hear someone who was a lawyer and got to become a musician. I know a few people like that. There's like a drummer in town. I actually don't know him, but have a lot of mutual friends who I think he was a drummer in or he was an attorney at a law firm in Portland. And then I think he was like on a tour with Train and some other band. Like he really like kind of made it into the big touring world. And I think now it's just mainly plays drums. You've got a career waiting for you in case the music thing doesn't work out. Yes. I think also that was when when Weezer covered Africa. When did they cover it? I feel like that was also.
That's a good question.
2018. Yeah. Okay, so that was right around the same time. I actually don't love Weezer's cover of it. It's like really similar to the Toto version, but it doesn't have some of the little peculiarities that make the Toto version work. Like that keyboard solo is very specific and works for me for a couple of specific reasons. So anyways, I was like, I've got a take. Like I can have a take on why Africa is a beloved song and why people really like it. It was to do with like the harmonies on the chorus and how there's no clear lead part. And so it creates a sense it's like got an emotional bigness to it that goes beyond one lead part, because the harmonies are just as important as the melody. And that's I think kind of what that episode is about. It's so short. I haven't listened to it in a while. I think I feel like I pronounced some of the guys' names wrong. I don't know.
You pronounced Jeff. The drummer. You called him Jeff Porcaro.
Jeff Porcaro, that's it. I have to go back and fix that.
So that leads me to a question, because you've been doing Strong Songs you just finished your 6th season of it. You're about to
5 years, I guess.
5 years. You're about to start
coming up on 6 years, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so you've been doing this for a while. The general vibe of the show has remained the same, at least as far as I can tell. I am not a serial listener to Strong Songs. I think I'm probably like a lot of folks where I'll pick, all right, there's these 15 songs that I want to hear Kirk's dissection of, and I love listening to them on the way home from gigs. You are an exciting person to listen to, and the subject matter is also exciting to me, and so it's a perfect way to stay awake on the way home from gigs and that sort of thing. Yep. And so it's great. And it's music without it being more music, right? And so so I drop in and I any given episode I might go from season 5 to season 6 to season 1 to and the gist is the same. The production quality, but also just your production methods have evolved greatly over the years. So I'm curious if you have any designs on repeating a song, for example, like Africa, taking what you're doing now with how deeply you dissect these things. Have you thought about going back and like doing Africa or any other song again?
Yeah. I have, not to replace that episode. Because I think that the journey of the show is actually pretty interesting. Like, I'm fine with those early episodes being, I wouldn't say low effort, but they were just like much more casual. And I spent a lot less time on them, like a lot less time on that episode than on, like, for example, that fish episode you were talking about, which was
we'll talk about that in a minute.
Kind of an insane undertaking. I think it'd be fun to do a season that is like called Second Helpings, where I come back and do additional songs by artists I've covered. Because it'd be fun to go back and talk more about Africa. But what I really want to talk about is Rosanna. Like speaking of Jeff Porcaro and like the Purdy Shuffle, which I've talked about on like the Babylon Sisters episode that I did.
Yeah.
And like I might do an episode on Lido Shuffle too. So that like there's this connecting thread between Bernard Purdy and Jeff Porcaro and like
and you've got to put John Bonham in the middle there, right? If you're doing that, like the shuffle that Porcaro played on Rosanna was a blend of what Purdy did plus what Bonham did on Fool in the Rain, and then this is the part that makes I can play the Purdy Shuffle from Babylon Sisters. I can play the Purdy the Fool in the Rain Shuffle. I can even play that song and sing it. Don't ask me how, but it's my brain lets me do that. The Rosanna Shuffle is about 40% faster, so your left hand's got to be really, really tight. And then he's playing the Bo Diddley groove with the kick drum. In that Rosanna Shuffle. So it's like, dude.
There's so much to say about that song. And that I think is more likely what I do. I run into this thing where people will request songs by artists that I've already covered. And I understand why, because most of the artists that I've covered are like all-time greats. They're people who've released tons of incredible songs. But at the same time, like I have this list of people I haven't covered that when I'm planning future seasons that I look at and I'm like, I can't justify doing a second Toto song when like I still haven't covered, I don't know, Bill Winters or something, or Bill Withers.
Sure.
Or I don't know, whatever. Like name your artists. Like name, I don't know, anybody on this list that I'm trying to make for the next season. So it's hard for me to justify doing second.
That makes sense.
Second artists second episodes on one artist. At the same time, there's a ton of stuff that I'd love to do, like a ton of second songs that I'd love to come back to, and I think they'd be really interesting. Like talking about an artist's evolution can be super interesting. The episodes where I've done 2 songs from one artist, like Fleetwood Mac, or the Cars. The Cars one is actually really interesting because that band changed so much from the late 70s into the 80s that it's really cool to look at how a band changes.
I have to stop you here. Because it was a fascinating thing when I listened to your episode where you did Dreams and The Chain from Fleetwood Mac. I had maybe a year prior covered that album with a friend. He does one album a month, and we get together and we learn the things. It's cool. And we had gone deep into that, learning all the harmonies, dissecting the crap out of it. At our rehearsals, there were 2 songs, one song from our bass player, one song from our guitar player, that they came in and they're like, I have to tell you my dissection of this song. And it was those 2 songs. And of course, the bass player was the one who did Dreams, and he was convinced that it had no tonal center. And you went through, like, your episode acknowledged that that's some people's interpretation. You did your own thing. Our guitar player gave, and I wish I still had it fresh in my mind, he gave this dissection of the chain where he related the harmonies and the lyrics as the actual chain. and I can't sing it
cool.
because my throat is shredded. But that high falsetto that Christy McVie sings that ties the chord together is actually the chain that ties not only the harmony together, but lyrically, it's the only thing that connects these two people that are fighting with each other in the song. I know. And so it was like,
good.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah,
Wow.
I was like, I got to tell Kirk this.
Yeah, that's good. That kind of stuff tends to emerge pretty organically. You know, when you're like, at least I find when I'm sitting down looking at the song, there'll just be these moments of sort of, oh, I like that. When it's kind of an interpretation, right? Like it isn't.
Of course, it's not
we
can't
exactly,
know that. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
But it's a great interpretation. Like it really feels. It feels like really potent. I think really early on when I was talking about Dancing Queen on that episode, there's a moment in that song where it shifts perspective that I never thought about until I was making the episode, where it's all it becomes like it's like see her there, watch her, you know, whatever. I'm forgetting the lyrics, but like basically it's you can jive having the time of your life. Like it's about you, and then suddenly it's like see her there. And so it goes from the listener being the dancing queen herself, like being this young girl who's so free out on the dance floor, to suddenly being a person who's looking at her and like appreciating how young and beautiful she is and like how free she is and how amazing that is. And it's like this, I think that it's like, it actually is at the heart of the bittersweetness of that song.
Oh, it's absolutely at it. Yeah.
Right. They're like, that song makes me cry every time I hear it. And I don't understand why. And I didn't really either. And some of it is like, it's these really lush kind of beautiful chords, a lot of these major sevens, and like it goes to minor in a kind of key place in the chorus. But I think that perspective shift is like, it speaks to something really crucial about the song.
That's it. Yeah, for sure. I was like, I have the same, for almost exactly the same reason. I have the same emotional reaction to Rush's Losing It, which the first verse is about that. It's, you know, the dancer slows her frantic pace in pain and desperation, her aching limbs and downcast face. Like it's that. It's almost picking up from the third verse of Dancing Queen too. You know.
Oh, that's good. That's funny. Yeah, I think that those kinds of details tend to come out when you do something like you're talking about, like learning to cover a song and getting really deep into it and then bringing it in to do an analysis of it. That's usually when those kinds of things come to the surface. It's like panning for gold or something.
Yeah, it is. It just happens. Yeah.
It totally happens to me all the time when I'm making this show. Like I don't go into an episode almost ever with a super deep knowledge of the song. Like a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I know it. When I listen to music, I hear a lot of stuff just because like I'm a trained musician and I hear all the things, like the basics that are going on. And I sit down at the piano, there are invariably a few chord progressions or just ideas that I didn't realize were happening. Like, oh, that's kind of cool. Or, oh, that's weird. They're like breaking this rule. Or there's like a note here that doesn't make sense but works. That kind of thing. Yeah. And then some of that like interpretive stuff, that lyrical stuff, those kinds of Tori Amos, Silent All These Years. I did an episode on that song. That's another one that plays with perspective and voice in the lyrics. That's really, really interesting. And the more I really sat down and kind of figured out, okay, who is the subject of each verse and what does that mean for the story this is telling? So I came up with my whole theory of it and then made the episode, and a bunch of people wrote in being like, here's my theory. And they had like really great theories that I hadn't considered that I think are like even, you know, widely accepted that are also really beautiful. Or I don't know, I did, my season finale was on Born to Run. I hadn't seen this actually in reading about the song and didn't think of it, but there are a lot of people who interpret Wendy in Born to Run as being like Peter Pan's Wendy, and that there's this whole Peter Pan reading of that song because it's like about a guy who never wants to grow up and he's with Wendy and that's why he chose Wendy. I don't know if Springsteen has ever confirmed that, but it's like a widely held theory about who Wendy is since Wendy is this notable name.
When I started doing this show, I did it with a co-host for 9 years, Paul Kent, and then his schedule got so that he just couldn't make it work. And but we we remain friends. It's all good.
That's good.
But he is like a huge Springsteen fan. So I will make sure he hears your episode of Born to Run. But I also now I want to ask him, who is Wendy? Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of like, is it Kremlinology? That like lyrical Kremlinology on like really, especially people like Springsteen who write like really dense lyrics, or of course Bob Dylan, but Tori Amos totally fits under that, and Joni, like a lot of these writers who have like lots of very dense lyrics in their songs. Sometimes I like hesitate to get too deep into lyrical analysis, even though I love writing and there winds up being a lot there to talk about. Doing Jesus, Etc., the Wilco song, talking about Jeff Tweedy's lyrics, the interpretations of them, and the really eloquent things he has to say about meaning in his songs and like how different people interpret lyrics different ways, and like the moment that the meaning of the song comes into focus, which is like the moment you sing it and the audience hears it. So there's like all that stuff is really interesting and heady and conceptual. Sometimes, at least, especially at first, I really avoided getting too into that because it was just easier to be like, okay, but it's an A major.
Here's the music.
9 chord.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And that's like the 9 sounds cool. And then that's like a nice sound.
You also have to pick your niche, right? I mean,
like, that's true.
You know, not that you aren't good at doing that other thing, but you're really good at digging into the music. So let's talk about, certainly, and I haven't listened to even half of your episodes, but certainly that Limb by Limb episode is the deepest I've ever heard you go. I mean, you recreated the entire song. So for people who haven't listened to Strong Songs, what Kirk does is, as you can tell, he is very thoughtful, picks a song, dives deep. If you listen to the Africa episode, I think anything that you deconstructed for that episode was all done on a piano, which was fine. It allowed you to highlight some things and show some things or whatever. And then often, and certainly now I think more often than not, what Kirk does is he will create at least snippets of a song, recreate snippets in time with the original recording, so that you can easily sort of float back and forth between them and say, okay, here, listen to the original recording. Now listen to my recreation where I can bring out the bass that you wouldn't necessarily hear and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So for Fish's Limb by Limb, you recreated every part of the entire song, including all the vocal harmonies, and then went back and forth. I have 2 questions about that. Number one, how long did that take you? And number 2, did you play that drum part or did you MIDI that drum part?
I MIDI'd the drum part.
Okay.
I could probably play that drum part. I could not play it like that. And I definitely couldn't play it that precisely. Like
it'll break your brain, that drum part. Yeah.
It's so this is Limb by Limb, a very complex, like an Afro-Cuban polyrhythmic 12/8 thing. And
that's not even doing it justice.
No, like, right. It's a rhythmically and beautiful song.
Yeah, what Fishman does, John Fishman, Fish's drummer, is for a lot of their songs, not all of them, but he likes to create patterns that are independence exercises to teach his limbs to play weird things at different times. One of the most famous ones that's not a Fish thing is Steve Gadd's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
Yeah.
That started as just a weird limb independence exercise.
It feels like a drum exercise.
It totally is. And Paul Simon came in and heard him doing it and was like, wait, keep doing that. And, and it became a song.
Started singing over it.
Limb by Limb is one of the many Fish songs that clearly just started as like, here's this independence exercise, and probably Trey said, keep playing that, let me write a song around it, and then there you go. So, but super difficult to learn, like, because it probably easier for a non-drummer than a drummer, because it breaks a lot of the patterns you've developed in your head. Okay, so you MIDI'd the drum part. So
I did MIDI the drum part, which took a long time. Like, it just going bar by bar. I mean, I really just went bar by bar. I used what's the audio stretch? I have like a transcribing app that I have that I use on my iPad for guitar transcription that I never used when I was. No, wait, is it Capo? Is that?
No, Capo is the name of the app from Super Mega Ultra Groovy.
No, there's a million of these though. I was like, is there a Capo on this song? No, I don't think so. It's an F, but he doesn't use the Capo.
No.
No, it's called Audio Stretch. I think you can't buy it anymore though.
Okay.
I think I've used Transcribe Plus. If people are looking for one of these, I think that one seems pretty good. Transcribe
Capo,
Plus.
I know the developer of Capo, and he has rewritten the audio engine in it so that when you stretch things, it doesn't like mess with the way they sound and that sort of thing.
Stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Audio Stretch is fine for that. I mean, I wouldn't like it's
I'll put links to both.
A little gross, but like so I used that, but just one of those apps because there's so many of them, and just slowed it down, and I really just went a note at a time, and like it took a lot because like you were saying, there's a lot of kind of counterintuitive stuff going on, especially during that guitar solo. He plays some really dope like hemiolas. Some of those parts, like now I just hear them and I hear them, but at the time it was just really like, okay, where is each thing? Just
what is he doing? Yeah.
What is he even doing?
He amazes me that he comes up with this stuff and can play it, but even more than that is he pulls this stuff off live, off the cuff. Like he will come up with patterns like that live with 15,000 people in the room. It's like, dude, if you F this up, it's gonna like the whole place is just gonna fall down.
I think they've learned though, right, that like the wheels never truly fall off the bus, because they definitely crash sometimes, and then they just recover because they're so used to playing with one another. That
they listen.
I think he feels empowered to take risks.
He does,
like,
but
the
those
worst
are
thing
some
that can
pretty
happen
big risks. Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I really love that recording. I've always I like Live Fish fine, but that was never my main thing with that band. Like I went to a Fish festival with a friend. It was kind of too much. Like I'd never seen them live, and then he's like, we should just go to Fish festivals. This was in Indio in like I think 2007, and we went, and it was like 4 sets of Fish, and it was cool, but at the same time it was kind of like a lot of sets of the same band, and I'm not deep enough into the live thing.
No, you need to know the catalog to really
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I like their studio stuff and grew up listening to a few of those records really closely. I think Junta, Hoist, and Rift. And
Rift
then
is such a great record. Yeah,
I love Rift. I almost did Rift. That was one of the songs I was considering for the show. And then Story of the Ghost, I really loved. It was the one that came out when I went and bought it when it came out and listened to it, and like found it challenging at first, and then kind of got past that and like discovered what I liked about it and always came back to it. And then Limb by Limb was like, it's just such a high wire act. It's so short that it actually worked really well for the episode, because it allowed me to really recreate the entire thing. I didn't set out.
And that song's better on the record than it is live. I've seen them play it live, and it's they cut parts out. They smoothed it out a little too much. Like no. Yeah.
I agree. I'm sure they played it when I saw them live, but there's a bunch of versions on YouTube, and it's just not, it's a very different thing. Like they kind of sing it and then they just jam for a while on 1 to 4 and F. And it's like, cool. It's a Fish jam. It goes a lot of different directions, but
the it's studio not version, that solo. Yeah.
Yeah. That solo is unbelievable. It's really my favorite Trey Anastasio solo. And I challenged myself to transcribe it, because like I said, I've been like really getting serious about guitar over the last few years, and I've gotten to the point where I can learn that solo, which is I'm very
impressive.
Proud of that. Yeah. I'm very proud of that progress, just because there comes a point where, I don't know, the older I get, the better I feel about showing that I can still learn new things and surprising myself, being like, wow, I'm playing this guitar solo that I have spent so many years listening to, and like, that whole crazy arpeggio section over the B section, like I really learned it. Yeah. And so I challenged myself to do that. That took me I spent months practicing that. I still can't play it perfectly at tempo, but it took me a long time. Like I knew I was going to do this song months ago, like months before it published.
Months before,
sure. Working on it. So I worked on that solo. That alone, if you count that as like prep for that episode, like I spent dozens of hours making that episode, but I don't really count that. I feel like it's the same as saying, well, if I talk about Sonny Rollins, you have to count every hour I spent transcribing Sonny Rollins in my past. Which
it doesn't count.
It works.
That's not how it works. But the episode was a catalyst for you to sort of take that tangential path.
A good excuse for it. Yeah.
A good excuse. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So then I just, recreated Mike's bass parts, which are really cool on that song as well. The piano parts were pretty easy, actually. So I'd say of the instruments that I play, saxophone and like woodwinds, flute and clarinet are all like much higher than everything else. Guitar though is like getting there. Like I'm getting to where I could really play. Yeah,
if you played that limb by limb solo, even if it wasn't up to tempo or even all at the same time, the fact that you can technically play all of those things that's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, I can play the guitar at this point. I'm getting to where I'm happy with it. And then kind of piano, I can like I've played in piano in bands, like played keyboard in bands and stuff.
Sure.
And then drums and bass are kind of like I haven't played drums in a while. I'm in the process of building a studio where I can practice again and like get my chops back up. But there was a minute there where I was practicing a lot of drums, and then kind of everything else like mandolin or banjo, like instruments that I've owned and can play and use to record but not really play. So it was really in order on that song. Guitar was the one that like I could really do all the guitar parts and recreate those. And then bass and drums were more. I cheated a lot more in making those, and like drums were all MIDI. And
I figured it's like there's no way. There's no like I know this guy's good, but there's no way.
That would be like, I'm not Jacob Collier or whatever. I'm not some freak who can like actually play every instrument that well.
I think some people might disagree with. Yeah, you're on your path to being that kind of freak, and that's a good thing. That's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to feel like it is actually like that. It's possible to work toward. Just because I think a lot of people think, well, Jacob Collier was as good as he is when he was 15 or whatever. And if you're not that good when you're 15, then forget about it.
Forget it.
And I don't think that's really the case. Like I'll never be as, as good as someone like him, as one of those like true, like people with amazing brains that can do things that most brains can't do. But at the same time, I'm gradually
your brain can do the things your brain can do. Yeah.
I'm going one at a time. So that episode was really fun to put together. I think this whole season 6, for the most part, episodes have had really elaborate recreations that, because I changed the way that I'm making the show and I'm working more in advance, I just spend a lot more time on the recreations and like really get into the nitty gritty. So like Peter Gabriel, I did In Your Eyes, and like really got into like getting the right synth sounds and getting the drums to really match. And I think that really, it's a fun process for me. It's fun because I feel like I get to show off a little bit, just because I think musicians listen and they're like, wow, he like really got the synth sound. And I feel proud of that. And it just is like a sort of validating feeling. But also it's really instructive for the episode because it helps me understand like what it took to make the album sound the way that it sounds. So then like learning Black Hole Sun, where I like recreated all of that, that's like I don't know, a lot of those 90s grunge records are really cool in how basic they are, like how basic the mix is, or how the drums are really just like drums in a room, but they sound so great on that record. And so, I don't know, like each of those recreations is really challenging and rewarding on its own, but then winds up, I think, informing the episode. So I've been doing a lot more recreating, and I want to be careful not to get too into just showing off or like doing it just to do it, because in the end, I am talking about the original recording. Like I am trying to get people to hear something new and not just be like, look how great I am. Like I've been practicing guitar. Yeah. And I can play this solo. And it's like a little bit of that goes a long way.
I got a little bit of that listening to the Limb by Limb episode, which was the first episode of yours I'd ever even heard of. And then as I dug into the rest of it, it was like, even the little bit that I got from the Limb by Limb episode, it wasn't annoying. It was like,
that's
wow,
good. It's like I'm proud of this. I did a
you
cool
should
thing.
Be.
Like check it out.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, as a musician, I have spent, thousands of hours doing the thing. And so it's like, I can do that. Like,
I'm like a performer. Like part of the show is me performing and getting to kind of be like, check it out, music. It's cool. So right? Watch.
Like, speaking of performance, are you still gigging at all? Like, do you gig regularly or even semi-regularly?
Yeah, semi-regularly. Like I'm definitely not doing the jazz gigging thing anymore. I haven't done that in a long time. Like since I started the Kotaku gig, I was like, I just don't have time.
Sure.
And honestly, like most gigs just aren't that fun. I just never had a great time doing the jazz gig thing. Like
got it.
In San Francisco, I got to do some really cool shows. Like I played with Petula Clark or Connie Francis. Like I had a friend, my friend Daniel is a bassist who plays with like everybody when they come to town, especially like he got in with like the sort of older dame singers, like these kind of well-known ladies who are huge and like got a big turnout in San Francisco, and I got to play like in the horn section for those shows and like do that kind of thing. And then also just like jazz gigs where I'm like going around and just playing standards at some wine party or something, and like that's the kind of work that you do if you're gigging usually, especially as a horn player. It was never really my thing. And like just the logistics, the time that it takes, the sitting around, all of it for, then to play music for people who aren't listening. Like it's never really been my thing. So
did you ever become aware of a band in the Bay Area called the House Rockers?
No.
Okay, because that's the band that the co-founder of Gig Gab and my former co-host started, and he's got a 5-piece horn section. He's the Bruce Springsteen,
nice.
big fan, and so he's built his own version of that kind of cover band kind of thing. So that scene in the Bay Area is actually really awesome. The like tribute and cover band scene, which I never really got into. I was like doing the jazz thing and then like the rock thing. My buddy Dan, the other Dan, there were 2 Dans in my band.
band. Dan, the lead guitar player, who's an incredible guitarist, he plays in a couple of cover bands now, almost full time in the Bay Area, and they're great. Like I think the shows are super fun, and they like totally kill it. It's a really amazing musician. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that world is cool, and I never really got into it. That can be a fun thing. I had some buddies of mine who lived in Chicago for a long time and were really big in the like wedding sort of repertoire,
the function band kind of thing.
Yep. And like killing trumpet players who do that stuff. But that was never really my thing. And I think even that work, like it's still the sort of grind of gigging, like of just going to a new place every night, lots of travel, lots of sitting around. And that just wasn't quite my scene. Like I like writing and making music in my little room, and I like working with people in the studio, and I like performing my own music with people live. But that's like, I don't know, like I never quite had either the drive or the thing that can make you push that all the way to it becoming a real like income source, which just takes like an insane amount of work and luck and talent and everything.
Dedication and all of those things. Yep.
So for me now, I like, I'll play, there are a few bands in town that I'll like do horn arrangements for or play with just because they're kind of cool and they're fun to play with. And I really want to put together a Strong Songs live show that's like kind of it's like an hour long, or maybe a 2-set. Like one is like a musical performance and one is more of a Strong Songs-y music explanation thing, and figure out this kind of like a programmed hour-long musical experience that involves some narration, but the whole thing is kind of scripted with a house band with like 2 other singers and different instruments that does like maybe different covers of songs that I've covered on the show, and like that can kind of bring out different elements of those songs that I've talked about on the show and kind of create this like coherent Strong Songs experience live. I think it'd be amazing. This idea. Like, I think it would be.
And it would be different, right? Because it'd give people the opportunity to come in and listen to songs that they already know, but not just like any other cover band is shown up and is playing the songs that they already know.
It'd be very different, I think.
Yeah, you've got your own spin on it. Oh, I like this idea.
Yeah,
that's good.
It's the kind of thing where I haven't had the time, or I guess I just have to sit down and really hash it out, and it'll be a lot of work. It'll require like a startup investment and like getting the right people and rehearsal and like booking a venue and convincing a venue that I can bring people out. And I don't even know like how many people would come out for that. Like I think maybe a lot of people would, because it's always hard to know, like like
well, you're in the like Pacific Northwest, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Portland.
Okay, great. All right. My son went to school in Portland for a little bit. I
nice.
love
Cool.
that town. I would love to get back there when it's not all in COVID lockdowns, because that's really the only way I've experienced Portland, Oregon.
Or like covered in smoke. Yeah, it's a lovely place to live.
Yeah.
And a great music scene. Man, moving here from San Francisco, I greatly prefer it here. Like people in Portland come to shows, which is nice. I never felt that way in San Francisco. I never felt very supported. Where here, when I go to a show or play a show, like just people like to go see music here in a way that I find really cool. So I think that's.
So I would come out for that. I need an excuse to visit Portland anyway, and so we'll.
Nice.
All
right.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, I got to put it together.
Keep me posted.
It's my plan for the next year or two.
All right.
Is to get that happening, and then I think that'll be a primary sort of performance outlet for me, which I really need. This is I'm sure you've heard a similar idea to this. Actually, my friend Daniel, that same bassist, I think this was his concept first, is that there's a tripod for every musician, that you need to be teaching, you need to be learning, and you need to be performing. And that if you're doing all 3 of those things in balance, you're kind of at your best as an artist. And I really like that concept because I found it to be true. Like if I'm doing all 3 of those things, I feel good. And if one of them kind of gets out of balance, like I just feel a little off. And for me right now, for sure, performing is like the least strong. Like I feel like Strong Songs, like making the show, it is a performance. Like thousands of people listen to me play guitar and stuff. So
absolutely. Yeah.
But it's not the same as getting on stage and like doing the actual musical experience of like sharing music in a room with people.
In a room with bodies. Yes.
In the end, what music is about.
Well, it's one of the things music is about. Like saying that's the only thing would discount the experience of listening to a record, but it's not the only thing. But it is, to me, for me, it's the most important part of what music is. But that's personal, Yeah.
It's true, and it is. Yes, it is personal, and music can be anything. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. That like fundamentally, and for whatever tens of thousands of years, that's what music was, right? And it's
Fair.
only in the last 100 years, because of the advent of recorded music, that it's become something else. And there really is kind of this distinction between recorded music and all of the things that recorded music allows and allows music to be, and then musical performance with one another, which is like so fundamental to like what it is to be human. And that really is that thing of like a bunch of people sitting around dancing or like drumming and feeling the pulse together, or a person like, you know, playing music and singing while everybody else is in the room with them. Like, I do really feel something fundamental there that I miss sometimes when I'm not experiencing it,
yeah.
I'm not like a part of it.
No, that's there's a magic to that is not something I've found a way to recreate. Like there's no artificial way of getting that. You just have to go and do it.
You know, it's funny. Yeah. I was talking with some folks in my Discord, in the Strong Songs Discord server, about reaction videos. And how, you know, like on YouTube, there's a lot of reaction videos where you'll just watch like two guys in some metal band you've never heard of watch John Farnham sing Help Me in the 80s. Yes. And they're just watching him. This is a specific video, actually. And they're just watching him being like, who is this guy? What is this song? Whoa, he's amazing. Listen to his voice. Wow. And it is kind of like getting at something fundamental that we all want. They were asking, like, why is it that reaction videos are everywhere on YouTube and they're so popular? And my take, anyways, is that people watch those because you're kind of getting to sit in the room with other people and listen to music together. And that is like, it's kind of recreating some element of that like social musical sharing feeling. It's just you're doing it through YouTube because sometimes we're just sitting alone or we're on our phone or whatever, but we still can kind of get a little hit of that feeling by watching somebody else. So I think that's like, there are these interesting new technological ways of experiencing it's some version of it.
Well, it's something related to it. I think. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Man, I feel like we could like talk about a million things, so we'll just have to schedule another one of these and have you back.
This really is very fun, man.
I had something come to mind though that I need to share with you, and I'll share it with the audience. And plant it. We can discuss it if you want right now, but briefly plant it in your brain. We were talking about "Fool in the Rain," and then you got, and then we got onto songs inspiring other songs. I had played "Fool in the Rain" at a gig. Got in my car, was driving home, turned on some playlist I had. This is a decade and a half ago. And Genesis's Misunderstanding came on.
Okay.
And if "Fool in the Rain" is dun 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 dun, and Misunderstanding is dun 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 dun. It's like very similar progression. The groove is upside down. The shuffle is backwards. And the Misunderstanding lyrics are, "I waited in the rain for hours, you weren't there," right? And so lyrically, these songs are related, for sure. Groove, they're related. And so I got home, of course, and looked on the internet. And many other people had noticed this before me, obviously. Yeah. And it was interesting because I think Misunderstanding came out before "Fool in the Rain, but both bands were in the same studio at the same time recording. So it's hard to say which one was actually written first, and did they hear each other's things, and where did it come from? So I don't know. But
I get a lot of questions about that kind of thing, especially with like the recent copyright lawsuits and whatever the Katy Perry suit or the Ed Sheeran thing. And my general take is that I dislike any of those lawsuits. Like I just feel like musicians have been stealing from one another forever, and that's just the way it goes. I really liked, I think it was Elvis Costello replying to there's an Olivia Rodrigo song that sounds a lot like one of his songs. Okay. And it does when you listen to it. It's like, all right, they kind of, it's like a similar kind of riff. And his response, I think it was on Twitter, is he was just like, yeah, it sounds kind of similar, but like I've stolen tons of things. That's just rock and roll, baby. Like, let her do her thing. Like he was totally like, who cares? Like whatever. Like it's a cool, her song is good. My song, I liked it, whatever. It's fine. And I generally feel that way. But at the same time, like, like people get really weirdly fixated on the legal aspect of it, when what's so interesting is the creative aspect.
I don't think there's any legal thing between Genesis and Zeppelin over those two tunes, and I don't think anybody suggests.
Oh yeah,
no,
right. I don't mean that you were saying that, but that a lot of times the questions I get are framed that way.
Yeah,
but man, a thing that I've found a really interesting recurring thread is the "so what" horn part. So from Miles Davis' "So What," because it turns up on a lot of different things. One of them is on it's "Cold Sweat." So the James Brown tune "Cold Sweat," which is one of those really foundational grooves. Pee Wee Ellis wrote the horn part for that. And it has, and he straight up has said, like, I was listening to "So What," and I liked that horn figure, and I wrote it because it has like this. I think it has a similar harmony split with the horns.
Yeah.
But anyways, the more I listen, the more times I'll like hear a horn part and just be like, oh yeah, that's basically that same figure. It's not a complex figure. It's two notes, but still you can kind of trace it back. And then there's just a million things like that. Like, that's how all music works. It's a recurring theme on Strong Songs for sure, is like trying to reinforce in people that music is this like, it is like a chain. It's like this endless conversation. It's this endless linked thing that goes all the way back. And that those kinds of connections, like even just playing a song at a gig and then hearing another song on the radio and being like, oh, they're actually kind of similar. And then sitting down and learning them and realizing that they're connected.
They're even more similar than you thought.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a super beautiful thing. And actually going back to that live music versus recorded music thing, like it's something that recorded music makes possible, is that we have this amazing archive, right? We have this like long running document of everything, so we can very easily cross-reference what we're hearing and start to figure out, oh well, okay, so the first recorded example of the Bo Diddley beat, for example, is like this song, but actually if you go
it's
even
probably
further back,
not.
maybe it's it's somewhere else. Like that's like, we're all kind of musicologists in a certain way, and
well,
I
think at least in our armchairs.
It just lets everybody sort of start to understand their own relationship with those grooves and those chords and those songs and those ideas, and like I think that's really beautiful. Like that's a very cool thing that just enriches.
It makes music more interesting, and it gives us something to talk about, and like. Makes it deeper and deeper, and that's what I love about your show is you make music. Nice. You give people more things to talk about, and the more we can talk about music, the better. I mean, with all the other topics that are out there to talk with other people about,
I know
music's at the top of my list. So
I totally agree, and that's awesome to hear. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So it's very, very nice to hear that that's your takeaway. Cool.
Well, thank you for doing this. Where can people find you?
Well, I'm not on social media that much anymore, though I have accounts, I guess. So I'm on Instagram. I post stuff on Instagram. I'm easy to find, though. But I'm at kirkhamilton.com. I think there's links for all my stuff there. And Strong Songs is on all the podcast platforms. So it's also very easy to find if you just look for Strong Songs.
Of course. Well, I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for doing this. What a blast.
Yeah, man. It's my pleasure.
We have 3 words that we like to say to our audience. Do you have 3 words you might want to say?
I always be performing, everybody.
Those are the ones. We love it. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening, folks. Hopefully my throat's better for the next episode. We'll see you then. And we're out. It's that easy.